Hey crew, it's Pitt and I'm back with some more Esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mrs. Helena Blavatsky. This is The Secret Doctrine. We are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points that are brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but some people find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link for my book, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration with additional fragments from a commentary on the verses of stanza 12. The manuscript from which these additional explanations are taken belongs to the group called Song Shakti Sangai Sangha, or the records of 35 Buddhas of confession, as they are exoterically called. These personages, however, though called in the northern Buddhist religion Buddhas, may just as well be called rishis or avatars, etc., as they are Buddhas who have preceded Sakyamuni, only for the northern followers of the ethics preached by Gautama. These great Mahatmas, or Buddhas, are a universal and common property. They are historical sages, at any rate, for all the occultists who believe in such a hierarchy of sages, the existence of which has been proved to them by the learned ones of the fraternity. They are chosen from among some 97 Buddhas in one group and 53 in another. Footnote. Gautama Buddha, named Shakyamuni, is the 27th of the last group, as most of these Buddhas belong to the divine dynasties which instructed mankind. 53 in another, mostly imaginary personages who are really the personifications of the powers of the first named. Footnote 2. Of these Buddhas, or the enlightened, the far distant predecessors of Gautama the Buddha, and who represent, we are taught, once living men, great adepts and saints in whom the sons of wisdom had incarnated and who were, therefore, so to speak, minor avatars of the celestial beings. 11 only belong to the Atlantean race and 24 to the fifth race from its beginnings. They are identical with the Tirthankaras of the Jainas. These baskets of the oldest writings on palm leaves are kept very secret. Each manuscript has appended to it a short synopsis of the history of that subrace to which the particular Buddhala belonged. The one special manuscript from which the fragments which follow are extracted and then rendered into a more comprehensible language is said to have been copied from stone tablets which belonged to a Buddha of the earliest day of the fifth race who had witnessed the deluge and the submersion of the chief continents of the Atlantean race. There was only one continent. The day when much, if not all, of that which is given here from the archaic records will be found correct is not far distant. Then the modern symbologist will acquire the certitude that even Odin, or the god Woden, the highest god in the German and Scandinavian mythology, is one of these 35 Buddhas, one of the earliest, indeed, for the continent to which he and his race belonged is also one of the earliest. So early, in truth, that in the days when tropical nature was to be found, where now lie eternal unthawing snows, one could cross almost by dry land from Norway via Iceland and Greenland to the lands that, at present, surround Hudson's Bay. Footnote. This may account for the similarity of the artificial mounds of the U.S. of America, and the tumuli in Norway. In this identity that led some American archaeologists to suggest that Norwegian mariners had discovered America some 1,000 years ago. There is no doubt that America is that far distant land into which pious men in heavy storms had transferred the secret doctrine, as a Chinese writer suggested by his description to Newman. But neither Professor Holmboe of Stockholm nor the American archaeologists have guessed the right age of the mounds or the tumuli. The fact that Norwegians may have rediscovered the land that their long-forgotten forefathers believed to have perished in the general submersion does not conflict with that other fact, that the secret doctrine of the land, which was the cradle of physical man and of the fifth race, had found its way into this so-called New World, ages and ages before the sacred doctrine of Buddhism. Now, we do know now that indeed Norwegian mariners did discover America prior to, but we also know that there were people here. Some of them are those people that we call the mound builders, right? I live in Louisiana. Here we have several mounds. Right up the road, LSU, Louisiana State University, they have one of the mounds right there on campus. I've been there several times. We have a serpent mound up in North Louisiana. There are several others scattered about. And it is true, we do not know who built those, but it was almost certainly not Norwegian mariners. And it was almost certainly well before there were any Norwegian mariners who had made their ways to the very select place that they went in the northeast region of the continent. None of them, as far as we know, made it down to South Louisiana. There is no reason to believe that they did. There is no evidence whatsoever that that was a thing. But we have these mounds, and there is almost certainly an explanation for it that we do not, as of yet, have. But it was built by a peoples. They were a numerous peoples. They had the ability to take the time off from surviving to build these mounds. And while we do not understand the entirety of why they are there, some of them have bones and they were burial sites. Some of them do not. The fact that they exist is indisputable. There is absolutely unexplained earthworks here on this continent. Now, as far as I am aware, we don't have any actual pyramids here. That is something completely separate on the North American continent from everywhere else. There are pyramids in South America. There are pyramids in Africa. There are pyramids in Europe. There are pyramids in Asia. I don't know if there is in Australia or not, but I would not be surprised if there was, or even if there wasn't, really, because we are the exception. Australia might be an exception as well. But it is important to note that the peoples were here on this planet a very, very long time ago, and they were completely separate than these others, right? They don't have many of the cultural traditions at all, right? There's no whatsoever. There is a flood story. They've got that. They have the earth is repeatedly destroyed. They have that. But they don't have a record of these people, who they were, or even what they believed. And so anything that is in that is going to be speculation. Just so we know what's going on. All right, back to the text. Just as in the palmy days of the Atlantean giants, the sons of the giants from the east, a pilgrim could perform... The giants from the east, you say? The giants from the... I'm pretty sure that's the first time we've seen that particular reference, and if not, then okay. But Atlantis was in the west, and so if the giants were from the east, they were not from Atlantis. Now, once again, I'm going to point out that she has 0 reference points for linking the giants to Atlantis. The only reference we have for Atlantis is Plato. We have covered it. It is part of the Ancient Lore playlist. And there's no mention of giants whatsoever. There's no mention of advanced technology. They have sailing. They have a military, an organized military. They have probably steel working, right? They have many of the things, but they don't have giants. That is one of those inconsistencies that we have to repeatedly point out as we journey through this exploration. Just because you believe it doesn't make it true. Just because I believe it doesn't make it true. And just because she believed it doesn't make it true. The Atlantean giants are not linked to Atlantis. We have stories of giants, just none of them are linked to Atlantis at all. Now, she makes the leap that what is written in the Rig Vedas is talking about Atlantis, and it may be true, but we don't have any reason to believe that it is. And once again, that is just important to point out for consistency's sake, if nothing else. The sons of the giants of the east, a pilgrim could perform a journey from what in our days is termed the Sahara Desert to the lands which now rest in dreamless sleep at the bottom of the waters of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea. Again, no evidence for this either. Now, I believe in a cycle of destruction. I believe that there are proofs thereof, right? If you were unaware, here's one that you may not know. There is a cypress forest in the Gulf of Mexico. It was buried. Now, the experts say that it was 60,000 years ago. I disagree with that, right? They use carbon dating. Carbon dating is extremely unreliable. It is probably closer to 12,000 years ago for a variety of reasons. It may have been 6,000 years ago for the exact same variety of reasons, but that doesn't mean that I'm correct. But there is an entire forest well off the coast of Louisiana, and it is not explained by the glaciation changes that they try to say that it is explained by. There is, in my opinion, a cycle, a 12,000 year cycle of disasters. It has a repeating antipode of 6,000 years. There is a hot one and a wet one, and it may be that the earth changes on both the hot and the wet, or just the one, right? The actual tilting of the earth may actually only take place every 12,000 years, with the flood just being there, right? These are the things we don't know for sure. We know without a doubt that the magnetic pole of the earth flips roughly 6,000 years. We know that without any equivocation whatsoever. The suppositions that we make on top of that, based upon science, are still speculations until they are proven, so I don't stand on them as fact, but there are very good reasons to believe that this thing does indeed happen. And so there are lands which now rest in dreamless sleep at the bottom of the waters of the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean Sea. But that does not mean that those in particular were Atlantis, and very important, it is directly contradicted by the only existing testimony of Atlantis that we have. It does not say that it is on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. It says that it is outside of the Pillars of Hercules, that it is easy to get to, right? And then it wasn't, because when it sank, it disturbed all of the waters. But it also tells you that on the other side of that continent was another land. That there was indeed another land, and that other land would have been North and South America. And so, once again, it is important to just maintain the things that we do know against the things that we speculate about. Events which were never written outside of human memory, but which were religiously transmitted from one generation to another and from race to race, may have been preserved by constant transmission within the book volume of the brain and through countless eons, with more truth and accuracy than inside any written document or record. All right, so this is not exactly true. We do have a record that the record existed. We don't have the record, right? But once again, Timaeus, right? We have Plato writing down what he heard from Socrates, who got it from his uncle Solon, who got it from a priest of Egypt. It is 4 times removed, and we don't want to take away from the fact that that is what that is, right? It is hearsay, but it is hearsay based upon factual recorded information, right? This is something that was a personal experience relayed to him, and he recorded it. It could have been fanciful. It could have been completely made up. That is something that we have to admit, but there are many reasons to believe that it wasn't. And what was recorded was that the priests, right, the 4 times removed, the priest that told Solon told him that there were records, that there were written records. So this is not true, right? Once again, she is discounting what is actually written in Plato to fit it to what she wants. Plato doesn't say that there were giants at any point whatsoever. He says that Atlas formed it. He says that the 10 sons of Atlas were the kings, but he does not describe them in any way, shape, or form as abnormal. He does not say that they were giants. He does not at all intimate that they were larger than regular humans at all. He says that there was a technologically advanced civilization, but that just means that they could sail, or they had food preservation, or they were able to farm, and they had better than the surroundings technical advancements. That doesn't mean that they had cars. That doesn't mean that they had airplanes or some kind of fanciful crystal devices that shot laser beams, right? It's possible, but we have no reason to believe that. It, however, is entirely likely that these people who lived on this continent were able to sail on the ocean long before we thought that people could do so. Right? There are reasons to believe that one. There are reasons to believe that there was sea navigation before we thought that that was possible. The pyramids in South America, which are coincidentally remarkably similar to some of the ones in Asia, not in Africa, but Asia, those are good reasons to believe that there was at one point some sea navigation. Not definitive, not proof, but things that lead you in that direction. And that's just one of the examples. There are more. The cultural significances that were retained, the flood stories, those can be from a single source. I don't necessarily believe that, but it is entirely possible. And so it is important to bear in mind that just because something is written down doesn't make it true. But if something is written down and you are going to use it as a reference point, then you should probably, quote it correctly. You should probably take the things which are directly stated in it and at least acknowledge them, right? She is, without a doubt, taking what is said in Plato and Timaeus and not recording it faithfully here. There is no record of the giants. There is no reason to believe that there was no written record, right? Literally what she is quoting is talking about a written record. Now, what happened to that written record? That's good for speculation right there. It is entirely possible that it burnt when the Library of Alexandria burnt. That is possible. It is entirely possible that it was taken and hidden before it was burnt. That also is entirely possible. And if you were wondering who might do something like that, the ones that had the pontiff die last night. Yes, the Catholic Church are absolutely hiding history from humanity without any shadow of a doubt, and I do not even speculate upon that. Back to the text. That which is part of our souls is eternal, says Thackeray, and what can be nearer to our souls than that which happens at the dawn of our lives? Those lives are countless. That is a guess. That is one that I agree with, but it is still a guess. But the soul or spirit that animates us throughout these myriads of existences is the same. That, again, is a guess. And though the book and the volume of the physical brain may forget events within the scope of one terrestrial life, the bulk of collective recollections can never desert the divine soul within us. Its whispers may be too soft, the sounds of its words too far off the plane perceived by our physical senses, yet the shadow of events that were, just as much as the shadows of the events that are to come, is within the perceptive powers and is ever present before its mind's eye. It is this soul voice, perhaps, which tells those who believe in tradition more than in written history that what is said below is all true and relates to prehistoric facts. This is what is written in one passage. The kings of light have departed in wrath. The sins of men have become so black that the earth quivers in her great agony. The azure seat remains empty. Who of the brown, who of the red, or yet among the black, can sit in the seats of the blessed, the seats of knowledge and mercy, who can assume the flower of power, the plant of the golden stem, and the azure blossom? What is stated in this? The kings of the light have departed. Okay. The sins of men have become so black that the earth quivers in her great agony. That I got a problem with, right? What exactly of the sinful nature of man is what makes the earth quiver, right? Now, do I believe that man is corruptible? Absolutely. Have you seen today? Right? We have people that will literally fight for misinformation. Things that we know are verifiably untrue. They're out there fighting for it every single day, screaming and hollering and telling you that it's perfectly fine. Yet we don't have the earth quivering yet. It is possible that it will happen, right? We have several prophecies, not just Christian, several prophecies that these things will happen. And I have an explanation for that, but it has nothing to do with the sins of men, right? It is entirely possible that coincidentally, when the time period is up, men once again have become corrupted. That is entirely possible, but I don't believe that it is our sin that is going to cause it. It is a cyclic pattern. It happens fairly regularly. Once again, I refer you to the 12,000-year disaster cycle, where we talk about it in some extreme detail. But one of the things that will happen is that the earth will wobble to and fro like a drunkard, right? That is one of the prophecies. This is another one, right? The earth quivers in her great agony. That could be the turning. That is my interpretation of it. It is speculative until it happens. But I believe that it will happen for reasons which are outlined in the 12,000-year disaster cycle. I kick you back there so many times because there are reasons why I believe those things. It is not just something that I pulled out of my ass. It is something traceable and trackable. Suspicious Observers, or Space Weather News now, and are no longer Suspicious Observers, put out a video just today, just this morning. I watched it 30 minutes ago, where they were talking about how they just named one of these 6,000-year events, right? There is a whole list of them on the video today. You can go watch it. It's less than 5 minutes long, and you can see them listed. That is what is going to happen, at least in my speculations. And this plays into it, kind of, right? This is assigning responsibility for that happening to something that is probably not responsible for it, right? The sins, they're subjective, right? There are sins that we agree on. Killing someone with no reason, sinful. Absolutely. Committing rape, sinful. Absolutely. You won't find that one in the Bible, though. There are many things that we do wrong, but they are not tied to the earth and its orientation, right? If so, we would have long since been flipped. And so I just want to point out that this doesn't necessarily say anything. It says that the kings of light have departed in their wrath. Okay, that's your belief. We don't have any proof that the kings of life were a real thing. The sins of man have become so black that the earth quivers in her great agony. That is a cycle, right? And if it's going to happen at this time point anyway, does it really matter whether you are sinful or not? Now, I am not by any means telling you to revel in sin or to engage in a sinful nature, but sin is subjective. Once upon a time, it was perfectly fine for a man to have a multitude of women. Polygamy was the normal. It is no longer the normal. Which one was sinful? Was it when it was normal? Was that sinful? Well, everybody takes their examples from those people. Is it now? Is it sinful to not have sex with more than one woman? Is that it? Who knows? Who can say? Now, you can say for you. You can say my morals say that I should not engage in this, right? And for most things, that is the one you need to listen to. Now, if your morals are telling you to injure another person, they are wrong. You are doing life wrong. In any way, shape, or form whatsoever. If you are acting outside of the best interest of humanity, now yourself primarily, because it is your life, but if you are stealing from someone, you are doing life wrong. If you are engaging in physical altercations in which you are the aggressor, you are doing life wrong. You are allowed to defend yourself. You are allowed to participate in life. You are allowed those things. It is not sinful. It is sinful for you to take that aggression to someone. And so, once again, the earth doesn't have anything to do with your sin. You have to do with your sin. You're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. Now, I'm not going to tell you what your sin is. I did a whole Bible study and refused to tell you what they were all the way through it. There are objective things, right? Murder is one. If you kill someone in self-defense, that's not murder. The Bible says, thou shalt not commit murder. It doesn't say thou shalt not kill. That is wrong, right? You're allowed to defend yourself. Now, again, I don't hold the Bible as the great arbiter of morality. Then, like I just said, they missed a very big commandment, right? Thou shalt not rape. That's a big commandment. And not only did they miss it, they kind of encourage the opposite, right? If you go and you perform that act upon some woman who is unsuspecting and unwilling, all you've got to do is pay her dad. You're fine. That's what was said right after they gave you the law. Might want to reconsider that law. Back to the text. I know I go off on rants, but that's kind of why you're here, right? The Kings of Light is a name given in all old records to the sovereigns of the divine dynasties. All is a big word. The azure seats are translated celestial thrones in certain documents. There are no thrones in heaven, mainly because heaven as a concept is not a real thing. Right? There is source, there is God, and you can consider that heaven. I will grant that with full wholeheartedness, right? But it is not the Christian heaven. It can be the Jewish heaven because that one doesn't exist. It can't, right? It can't be. We come from source. We will return to source. There is no eternal damnation, once again, for your sins. That is entirely constructed in the New Testament for the New Testament. Right? You will not find a single reference to hell or heaven in the Old Testament. The flower of power is now the lotus. What it may have been at that period, who can tell? The writer proceeds, like the later Jeremiah, to bewail the fate of his people. They had become bereft of their azure kings, and they of the Devahu, the moon-like complexion, and they of the refulgent golden face, have gone to the land of bliss, the land of metal and fire, or, agreeably with the rules of symbolism, to the lands lying north and east, and from whence the great waters have been swept away, sucked in by the earth and dissipated in the air. The wise race had perceived the black storm dragons called down by the dragons of wisdom, and had fled, led on by the shining protectors of the most excellent land. The great ancient adepts, presumably, those the Hindus refer to as their Manus and Rishi. One of them was Vyasavato Manu. This is interesting to me, right? The great waters have been swept away, sucked in by the earth, and dissipated in the air. That is interesting because I'm not entirely sure. Is this talking about the flood or the time right after the flood? Could this have been the vapor canopy period? This is one of those things that I'm not sure of, right? There's a lot of speculation we can wrap up in this one. The great waters have been swept away, sucked in by the earth, and dissipated in the air. That almost has to be flood, right? That almost has to be the flood. But, again, who knows? The wise races had perceived the black storm dragons called down by the dragons of wisdom, and had fled, led on by the shining protectors of the most excellent land. These black storm dragons, is that clouds? Is that tornadoes? What are we talking about here? Called down by the dragons of wisdom. Are you talking about the dying Kohans and the Manus? Well, if that's so, why are they calling down this? What? There's a lot of questions here, and none of them are really answered. Had fled. Now, there is a legend, there is a story, we've talked about it before here, I believe in the Enuma Elish, about how there is a legend that the Anunnaki were here, right? If you're unfamiliar with the name, they were a race of people who was credited with creating humanity. Right, I'm building a game behind it, but that's separate. These people were different, right? But they were passing as human. They could have been human, except for the fact that they were visibly different, right? It is entirely possible that they were these with the refulgent golden face. If you were unfamiliar with Genesis, Abram, when he went to go interfere with the judgment of Lot, the angels were on their way to Gomorrah, or Sodom. They were on their way to Sodom where Lot lived, and Abraham saw them, and he saw them from a distance and immediately recognized them as angelic beings because of their countenance. That could have been this, the refulgent golden face. It could have been a visible aura around them. It could have been literally a golden face. Now, most people are completely wrong on what Sodom and Gomorrah got destroyed for, and if you're interested for the actual answer to that, I will refer you to the Bible study. But it is entirely possible that that was who this is. It is entirely possible that these people were the Manus and Rishis. Now, bear in mind that almost certainly, and by almost certainly I mean with 99.9% accuracy, the book of Genesis was taken from other people. The various stories were assimilated for the Jewish people to separate them from other people. They just took everybody's legends and stuck their own names on them. That is exemplified as an example by the Sumerian account of the flood as compared with the Noahic account, Noachian account, right? Noah is the only name that is different in that. Everything else was taken wholesale. And so it is not even almost certainly, but almost a guarantee, right, that the book of Genesis was just taken from other people. We have gone through that several times in this particular study. We did that in the Bible study. Now, when we did the Bible study, we said that we were going to attribute the best possible interpretation of it, and that was that Moses wrote it, which would have been a couple of thousand years after the events of Genesis. And so you should absolutely, at a minimum, take Genesis with a grain of salt, but there are very good reasons to doubt the entirety of the book. Back to the text. They, of the yellow hue, are the forefathers of those whom ethnology now classes as the Turanians, the Mongols, Chinese, and other ancient nations, and the land they fled to was no other than Central Asia. There, entire new races were born. There, they lived and died until the separation of the nations, but this separation did not take place either in the localities assigned for it by modern science, nor in the way the Aryans were shown to have divided and separated by Mr. Max Muller and other Aryanists. Nearly 2/3 of 1 million years have elapsed since that period. The yellow-faced giants of the post-Atlantean day had ample time, throughout this forced confinement to one part of the world, and with the same racial blood, and without any fresh infusion or admixture in it, to branch off during a period of nearly 700,000 years into the most heterogeneous and diversified types. The same is shown in Africa. Nowhere does a more extraordinary variability of types exist, from black to almost white, from gigantic men to dwarfish races, and this only because of their forced isolation. The Africans have never left their continent for several hundred thousands of years. If tomorrow the continent of Europe were to disappear and other lands to re-emerge instead, and if the African tribes were to separate and scatter on the face of the earth, it is they who, in about 100,000 years hence, would form the bulk of the civilized nations. And it is the descendants of those of our highly cultured nations who might have survived on some island without any means of crossing the new seas that would fall back into a state of relative savagery. Thus, the reason given for dividing humanity into superior and inferior races falls to the ground and becomes a fallacy. Well, there is definitely a fallacy here. This does not prove what she thinks it proves, right? Africa has been civilized for most of humanity's existence, right? At least scientifically. People believe that everyone came out of Africa. I do not believe that at all. I believe that there were many surviving peoples in their own individual arcs, whether that was an actual ship or just being led underground like the Hopi. And so they were already existent on that particular continent. They had the opportunity for civilization. Doesn't mean that they would civilized if all of the other people disappeared. Now, I do not hold, like she does, that these people are inferior. I hold that they merely did not have the same opportunities. There are geographical reasons why most of Africa was unexplored for a long time, right? I don't want to put a particular date upon it, but at least millennia, right? People did not go into the Congo recreationally, right? It's fucking dangerous. Like, enormously dangerous, like going into the Amazon. Not even counting the tribes, right? If you are from outside and you look a little bit different than what they're used to, you're probably going to die. That doesn't mean that they don't have the capacity to become better. It means that they didn't have the opportunity to become better. We discovered ironworking, right? They didn't have that in Central Africa. Then some of the places around the edge did, but the places deep inside did not, because they didn't have the opportunity to learn how to do ironworking. The random chance or the instruction, either one, didn't reach them. But they can do it today. You can go into Central Africa today, even to the poorest of nations, right? And you can teach these people how to do the things that we do. They don't have the opportunity, but that doesn't mean that they don't have the capacity. You, assuming that they don't have the capacity because they are an inferior race, is the fallacy here. That is the fallacy. You are poisoning the well. That is the fallacy. You are making incorrect conclusions. That is the fallacy. Not that there was superior and inferior races. I mean, there's not. There's just simply not. And if you think that melanin makes a difference in intellectual capacity, you're a fucking idiot. Back to the text. Such are the statements made and facts given in the archaic records, collating and comparing them with some modern theories of evolution, minus natural selection, vide physiological selection by G.J. Romans. These statements appear quite reasonable and logical. Footnotes. The first pages of Part 3, Science and the Secret Doctrine Contrasted. That's what we'll be getting into here shortly. Thus, while the Aryans are the descendants of the Yellow Atoms, the gigantic and highly civilized Talanto-Aryan race, the Semites, and the Jews along with them, are those of the Red Atom, and both the Quatrefages and the writers of the Mosaic Genesis are right. 4. Could chapter 5 of the first book of Moses be compared with the genealogies found in our archaic Bible? The period from Adam until Noah would be found noticed therein, of course under different names, the respective years of the patriarchs being turned into periods, the whole being shown symbolical and allegorical. In the manuscript under consideration, many and frequent are the references to great knowledge and civilizations of the Atlantean nations, showing the polity of several of them and the nature of their arts and sciences. If the third root race, the Lemurio-Atlanteans, are already spoken of as having been drowned with their high civilization in gods, esoteric Buddhism, how much more may the same be said of the Atlanteans? It is from the fourth race that the early Aryans got their knowledge of the bundle of wonderful things, the Sabha and Maya Sabha, mentioned in the Mahabharata, the gift of Mayasur to the Pandavas. It is from them that they learned aeronautics, Vawan Vidya, the knowledge of flying in air vehicles, and therefore their great arts of meteorography and metrology. It is from them, again, that the Aryans inherited their most valuable science of the hidden virtues of precious and other stones, of chemistry, or rather alchemy, of mineralogy, geology, physics, and astronomy. Several times the writer has put herself to the question, is the story of Exodus, in its details at least, as narrated in the Old Testament, original? Or is it, like the story of Moses himself and many others, simply another version of the legends told of the Atlanteans? No. Right. Now, I do not believe that the Mosaic account is in any way accurate, or even consistent with itself. Once again, fall back to the Bible study. But there is no reason to believe that it is Atlantis. For who, upon hearing the story told of the latter, will fail to perceive the great similarity of the fundamental features? The anger of God at the obduracy of Pharaoh, his command to the chosen ones, to spoil the Egyptians before departing of their jewels of silver and jewels of gold. And finally, the Egyptians and their pharaoh drowned in the Red Sea. Once again, I am going to refer you back. I can talk about these things because I spent an awful lot of time here. At the unconventional Bible study did not end up like I thought it would, right? I took off the glasses of predestination, and I took off the glasses of this guy had to die for us to be forgiven from sin. And I just read the book as it was written, doing word studies and going back and seeing what the actual words actually meant. The Mosaic accounts have a lot of problems, like a lot of problems, if you do not apologize for them. What actually happened was that there was well, this is speculative, but what happened was there was a rebellion. That is true. It is almost certain that Moses was not raised in the Egyptian pharaoh's house for a variety of reasons, but one of the best being he went back to Egypt with his brother and his sister. Right? He didn't go and then pick them up. He went with them. You don't believe me? He said, I can't do that. I can't talk. And he's like, fine, take your brother with you. Not your brother-in-law, but your brother. Aaron was his brother, right? That's one of them problems. Miriam, that's a whole different problem. But they left after killing a lot of people and taking all of the animals and the jewels and the gold, but all of the animals were already dead. If you don't remember, there was a plague, killed all of the animals that the Egyptians had. But somehow, they still managed a couple of days later to give them all to the Jews as they were fleeing. And then they just randomly decided to change their mind. It wasn't the fact that they left in the middle of the night while everybody was grieving over their children dying, taking all of these things with them, right? That didn't have anything to do with it. They were told to go, and then God changed Pharaoh's heart to chase them down through the desert in chariots. Okay, sure. There's a lot of problems if you do not read it with the assumption that it is automatically correct. Fall back. Watch it. I know it is a lot of videos, but if you're here, you will get value out of it. I promise you. For here is a fragment of the earlier story from the commentary. And the great king of the dazzling face, the chief of all the yellow-faced, was sad, seeing the sins of the black-faced. He sent his air vehicles, the one, to all his brother chiefs, chiefs of the other nations and tribes, with pious men, saying, Prepare, arise ye good men of the law, and cross the land while yet dry. The lords of the storm are approaching, their chariots are nearing the land. 1 night and 2 days only shall the lords of the dark face, the sorcerers, live on this patient land. She is doomed, and they have to descend with her. The nether lords of the fires, the gnomes and the fire elementals, are preparing their magic Agniastaria, fire weapons worked by magic. But the lords of the dark eye, evil eye, are stronger than they, the elementals, and they are the slaves of the mighty ones. They are versed in Ashtar, Vidya, the highest magical knowledge. All right, there's a footnote here, but we're going to talk. The lords of the storm are approaching. Okay. Their chariots are nearing the land. Okay. 1 night and 2 days only shall the lords of the dark face live on this patient land. She is doomed, and they have to descend with her. They are the nether lords of the fires are preparing their magic. But the lords of the dark eye are stronger than they, and they are slaves of the mighty ones. Could there be a different explanation for this? Could there be the lords of the storm approaching? Could that be a sign in the sky? Is that a possibility? Is it possible that there was a sign in the sky that everybody could see that let them know there was a time coming? Could that time have possibly been part of the cycle that happens every 6,000 years, right? There is a fire cycle and there is a water cycle. 12,000 years ago was a fire cycle. 6,000 years ago was a water cycle. The fire cycle was like a great flaming sword coming down from the sky and reshaping the topography of the earth. The flood was a flood, global, completely changing the topography of the earth. Most people died in both of these events. There are records. There are reasons to believe this. And this, to me, leads into that Enuma Elish thing that we were talking about earlier, how the Anunnaki created men. And then, I don't think we finished the story. I got distracted. But the Anunnaki created the men, but they weren't able to reproduce. And then two of the Anunnaki said, you know what? We're going to give them the capacity to procreate. That is one of the stories. Now, that is a speculative story that is based upon records, right? I think Sitchin was the one that put out that particular story in that particular order from that particular translation. But it is at least another explanation, even if it is not correct, it may be and is in the realm of speculation. It is something different. What is being said here? The Lords of the Storm are approaching. We see them. You have about 3 days to get ready, right? Or a day. It's 1 day and 2 nights. Is that what it said? 1 night and 2 days. So today, tonight, tomorrow, flood. That's what is being said here, right? Prepare, arise, good men of the law, and cross the land while yet dry. That tells me that there's probably a flood, or maybe the earth is going to sink the islands or the continents. Let's not get it confused, right? Somebody will pick that up. All right, now to the footnote on magical knowledge. Wrote the late Brahmacari Bawa, a yogi of great renown and holiness. Extensive works on Ashtar Vidya and such other sciences were at different times compiled in the languages of the times, but the Sanskrit originals were lost at the time of the partial deluge of our country. For Agnes Theoria, see Wilson's Specimens of the Hindu Theater. Come and use yours, i.e. your magic powers, in order to counteract those of the sorcerers. Let every lord of the dazzling face, and adept of the white magic, cause the V1 of every lord of the dark face to come into his hands, or possession, lest any of the sorcerers should by its means escape from the waters, avoid the rod of the four karmic deities, and save his wicked followers or people. Also part of that flood, right, they gave them the ability to breed, but those two decided to save the race. Like, what is the story is that the Anunnaki had these various peoples, right? Inanna, On, all of these peoples. Enki and Inanna gave the ability to procreate, and they saved them from the flood. They weren't supposed to. Now, Enlil had said, all of these people are going to die now. You gave them the ability to have sex. They can procreate on their own. They're causing all kinds of problems. We're just going to let them all flood out. We're going to let all of them die. And these two said, no, we're going to give them the capacity to save themselves. And they are, if the flood story is true, and if there were arks, then it is entirely possible that these two were the ones given the instruction for the arks. Humanity was supposed to die. They were not supposed to have the ability to avoid it, but they did. That was the story. And so what is being said here, let every lord of the dazzling face, that would be the golden countenanced Anunnaki, if that was real, cause the V1, the souls of every lord of the dark face, to come into his hands, lest any should by its means escape from the waters. So maybe the V1 wasn't a soul. Maybe it was an conveyance device, right? Now, the legend is that the Anunnaki were here to mine gold from another planet. That might be true. It might not be true. Who knows? If it was true, the story says the Anunnaki, when the flood came, left the planet in their vessels. Some of the vessels may not have made it, right? They may have been taken by some force. Now, Whether that was aligned with good or evil, who knows? It could have been the exact opposite of what we believe, right? We want to believe that good will prevail, but it is speculative. We don't know. There is no recording of this sorcery, right? For Atlantis, at least. But it is consistent in the flood stories that man had been corrupted, and that's why the flood was to happen. That is a consistency, right? I'm not trying to take away from that. I just don't necessarily believe it. I believe that that's the excuse that people use to cover up. Well, cover up's the wrong terminology too. That's the excuse people use to explain why the flood happened, but that doesn't necessarily make it true. All right, back to the text. May every yellow face send sleep from himself, mesmerize to every black face. May even they, the sorcerers, avoid pain and suffering. May every man true to the solar gods bind, paralyze, every man under the lunar gods, lest he should suffer or escape his destiny. And again, this is talking about making sure that people die in the flood. And may every yellow face offer his life water, blood, to the speaking animal of a black face, lest he awaken his master. Footnote 2. Some wonderful, artificially made beast, similar in some way to Frankenstein's creation, which spoke and warned his master of every approaching danger. The master was a black magician. The mechanical animal was informed by a jinn, an elemental according to the accounts. That would be the 6th level of existence. The blood of a pure man alone could destroy him. Part 2. 7 in Astronomy, Science, and Magic. The hour is struck, the black night is ready, etc., etc. Let their destiny be accomplished. We are the servants of the Great Four. Footnote 3. The 4 karmic gods called the 4 Maharajas in the stanzas. May the kings of light return. The great king fell upon his dazzling face and wept. When the kings assembled, the waters had already moved. But the nations had now crossed the dry lands. They were beyond the watermark. Their kings reached them in their vivans and led them to the lands of fire and metal, east and north. Still, in another passage it is said, stars, meteors, showered on the lands of the black faces, but they slept. And again, that is another thing that I am expecting in the 12,000-year disaster cycle. The speaking beasts, the magic watchers, kept quiet. The netherlords waited for orders, but they came not, for their masters slept. The waters arose and covered the valleys from one end of the earth to the other. Highlands remained, the bottom of the earth, the land of the antipodes, remained dry. There dwelt those who escaped, the men of the yellow faces and of the straight eye, the frank and sincere people. When the lords of the dark faces awoke and bethought themselves of their vivans in order to escape from the rising waters, they found them gone. Then a passage shows some of the more powerful magicians of the dark face, who awoke earlier than the others, pursuing those who had spoilt them, and who were in the rear guard, for the nations that were led away were as thick as the stars of the Milky Way, says a more modern commentary written in Sanskrit only. Like as a dragon snake uncoils slowly its body, so the sons of men, led on by the sons of wisdom, opened their folds, and, spreading out, expanded like a running stream of sweet waters. Many of the faint-hearted among them perished on their way, but most was saved. Yet the pursuers, whose heads and chests soared high above the waters, chased them for 3 lunar terms, until, finally reached by rising waves, they perished to the last man, the soil sinking under their feet and the earth engulfing those who had desecrated her. This sounds a good deal like the original material upon which the similar story in Exodus was built many hundreds of thousands of years later. I do not agree with that at all. That is not at all what is recorded in the book of Exodus. The biography of Moses, the story of his birth, childhood, and rescue from the Nile by Pharaoh's daughter, is now shown to have been adapted from the Chaldean narrative about Sargon. That is true. And if so, the Assyrian tile in the British Museum being a good proof of it, why not that of the Jews robbing the Egyptians of their jewels, the death of Pharaoh and his army, and so on? The great magicians of Ruta and Naitia, the lords of the dark face, may have become in the later narrative the Egyptian Magi, and the yellow-faced nations of the fifth race, the virtuous sons of Jacob, the chosen people. There were no virtuous sons of Jacob. One more statement has to be made. There have been several divine dynasties, a series for every root race, beginning with the third, each series according and adapted to its humanity. The last 7 dynasties referred to in the Egyptian and Chaldean records belong to the fifth race, which, though generally called Aryan, was not entirely so, as it was ever largely mixed up with the races to which ethnology gives us other names. Well, yeah, ethnology doesn't have 1, 2, 3, or 4 races. It would be impossible, in view of the limited space at our disposal, to go any further into the description of the Atlanteans, in whom the whole East believes as much as we believe in the ancient Egyptians, but whose existence the majority of Western scientists deny, as they have denied before this many a truth from the existence of Homer down to that of the carrier pigeon. The civilization of the Atlanteans was greater even than that of the Egyptians. It is their degenerate descendants, the nation of Plato's Atlantis, which built the first pyramids in the country, and certainly before the advent of Western Ethiopians, as Herodotus calls the Egyptians. And again, I am going to point out that this is not recorded by Plato. This may be well inferred from a statement made by Ammianus Marcellinus, who says of the pyramids that they are subterranean passages and winding retreats, which, it is said, men skillful in the ancient mysteries, by means of which they divine the coming of a flood, constructed in different places, lest the memory of all their sacred ceremonies should be lost. It is important to note that right now, today, there is great contention about this very thing. There are, at least some people, saying that there are subterranean passages and winding retreats underneath the periods of Khufu on the Giza Plateau. Whether that is true or not remains to be discovered. There is an access, at least in the descending chamber, which goes down. There is an interrupted spot, which has been partially filled by rubble, which may have been an access to further down. There are many things about the pyramids we don't know. The date at which they were built is one of those. It could have been these people. That is speculative. It could have been the Egyptians. Highly unlikely, but still speculative. But what was recorded was that it was ancient in the times that was recorded. So nobody has a record of them being built. They simply have a record of them being there. It is entirely possible that there are subterranean passages. It would even make sense, but once again, we do not know, despite anybody saying different. I believe that there is. I believe that that will be proven true, just so that we're clear, right? But until we have discovered exactly what is there, it will remain speculative. These men, who divined the coming of floods, were not Egyptians, who never had any, except during the periodical rising of the Nile. And again, that in order to say that, you have to completely disregard the recording of Plato, which is the only recording we have, right? Plato directly says that there was recorded alternating events of flood and fire. That took over everybody, not just one group of people, but the whole of the planet, right? Go back to Timaeus, please. Who were they? The last remnants of the Atlanteans, we maintain. Those races which are dimly suspected by science and thinking, of which Mr. Charles Gould, the well-known geologist, says, "Can we suppose that we have at all exhausted the great museum of nature? Have we in fact penetrated yet beyond its antechambers? Does the written history of man, comprising a few thousand years, embrace the whole course of his intelligent existence? Or have we, in the long mythical eras, extending over hundreds of thousands of years and recorded in the chronologies of Chaldea and of China, shadowy mementos of prehistoric man handed down by tradition and perhaps transported by a few survivors to existing lands from others? Sorry about the hiccups, I'm trying to get rid of them. Which, like the fabled Atlantis of Plato, may have been submerged, or the scene of some great catastrophe which destroyed them with all their civilization. After this, one can turn with more confidence to the words of a master who wrote, several years before these words were penned by Mr. Gould, "The fourth race had its periods of the highest civilization. Greek and Roman and even Egyptian civilizations are nothing compared to the civilizations that began with the third race after its separation. But if this civilization and mastery of arts and sciences are denied to the third and fourth races, no one will deny that between the great civilizations of antiquity, such as those of Egypt and India, there stretched the dark ages of crass ignorance and barbarism, ever since the beginning of the Christian era up to our modern civilization, during which period all recollection of these traditions was lost. As is said in Isis Unveiled, which we have done in its entirety, why should we forget that, ages before the prow of the adventurous Genoese clove the western waters, the Phoenician vessels had circumnavigated the globe and spread civilizations in regions now silent and deserted? What archaeologist will dare assert that the same hand which planned the pyramids of Egypt, Karnak, and the thousand ruins now crumbling to oblivion on the sandy banks of the Nile, did not erect the monumental Nagan Wat of Cambodia, or trace the hieroglyphics on the obelisks and doors of the deserted Indian village newly discovered in British Columbia by Lord Dufferin, or those on the ruins of Palenque or Uxmal of Central America? Palenque. Do not the relics we treasure in our museums, last mementos of the long-lost arts, speak loudly in favor of ancient civilization? And do they not prove over and over again that nations and continents that have passed away have buried along with them arts and sciences, which neither the first crucible ever heated in a medieval cloister, nor the last cracked by a modern chemist, have revived, nor will, at least in the present century? And the same question may be put now that was put then. It may be asked, it may once more be asked, how does it happen that the most advanced standpoint that has been reached in our time only enables us to see in the dim distance up the alpine path of knowledge the monumental proofs that earlier explorers have left to mark the plateau they had reached and occupied? If modern masters are so much in advance of the old ones, why do they not restore to us the lost arts of our post-Diluvian forefathers? Why do they not give us the unfading colors of Luxor, the Tyrian purple, the bright vermilion and dazzling blue which decorate the walls of this place, and are as bright as on the first day of their application? The indestructible cement of the pyramids and of ancient aqueducts. Here is something that you may not know. There is not any indestructible cement of the pyramids. Those blocks are fitted without mortar. The Damascus blade, which can be turned like a corkscrew in its scabbard without breaking. We have a legend of that. If you don't know, I used to be a blacksmith. We have a legend of that, and we make what we call Damascene steel, but it does not do that. It was considered unbreakable. I don't know that it was considered flexible enough to turn like a corkscrew, however. I'm not familiar with that legend about the Damascene, but it most likely was a blend of high and low carbon steel. Right? In the age of bronze or even iron, steel would be pretty godlike. Right? Steel was one of the advancements which really set us apart. Right? It advanced humans in a much more significant way than even iron. And so if you had the capacity to smelt iron, you had the capacity to make steel. Right? They are the same, kind of, right? You can do iron at low heat, but if you try to do it at high heat, you are going to make steel by accident. Now, you have to separate that into high carbon steel and low carbon steel, which is a process that can be done. And if you take high carbon steel and low carbon steel and you laminate it, which means stack it, and you compress it into a single element, right? Not element, element would be wrong. A single combination, right? You take the stack and you squish it and it becomes long and flat. That is how Damascene is made today. I have a knife in there that I made myself from Damascene steel, so that's why I'm talking about this with some authority. But I can tell you with absolute authority that that does not allow it to be turned like a corkscrew in its scabbard. Now, you could have a trick where the hilt could turn. That is possible, but you're not going to have a brittle metal that is going to be able to turn like that and still be a brittle metal. It's just not going to happen. So there may be some truth in the legend, right? If there was the capacity in Damascus to make this steel when everybody else was using iron, I could take that steel sword and cut straight through your iron sword. That is literally how that's going to work. And so that part of the legend absolutely makes sense, right? Somebody with greater capabilities becoming the dominant force is quite literally the entirety of human history. The first people to find out that you could plant seeds and grow things outstripped everyone around them by a large degree until it went out and everybody was doing it. The capacity to make knives from metal outstripped you from the ones who made knives from stones. Period. The end. If you could make steel, you were going to be the dominant force if everybody else was dealing in bronze and iron. There is no doubt about that. It is going to happen. And so there is reason to believe at least part of this, that there was a Damascus blade, but I do not believe at any rate or for any reason that you were able to turn it like a corkscrew in its scabbard. Now, the main legends that are associated with the Damascene blade is literally that it could chop through other blades. That is something that can be done. Back to the text. The gorgeous, unparalleled tints of the stained glass that is found amid the dust of old ruins and beams in the windows of ancient cathedrals, and the secret of the true malleable glass. All right, now, as far as I know, again, no malleable glass. But this stained glass, there can be reasons why we don't use these colors anymore. If you were unaware, in the early 19th century, we found uranium. And we got the bright idea that we could mix uranium with glass. And we could make dinnerware out of it. And so we had people eating off of radioactive plates. Once we discovered that, hey, these plates are killing people, we got rid of that glass. Now, some people still collect it. I've got a cousin's got a whole bunch of it. I'm not going to collect it for the reason that I like to live, right? When it's my time to go, it's not going to be because I chose it in any way, shape, or form. And if you know that these plates are probably going to kill you, there's no reason to have them around. If they found their vermilion was actually killing the artist, they would quit using vermilion. If the Tyrian purple was doing the same thing, they would quit using the Tyrian purple. The dazzling blue, same thing. We used to put lead in paint. Why? Because it made it prettier. It made it stand out more. It made it more durable. And it would also kill people. We learn, we grow, we change. That explains this. That is a full explanation on why we don't have stained glass or the colors. Now, is it accurate? Probably not, but it is a possibility, right? It is within the realm of speculation that this is why. It doesn't have to be some wild conspiracy, right? There can be a perfectly logical explanation. And just because you can Just because you can doesn't mean that you should, right? We can make uranium glass. That doesn't mean we should. They could make Tyrian purple or bright vermilion or dazzling blue. And as a matter of fact, you know where vermilion comes from? Do you know where that color comes from? I do. It comes from cinnabar. You know what cinnabar is? Raw ore from mercury, right? It contains a little bit of other elements, but that is the best place to get mercury from cinnabar. Cinnabar is what they use to make vermilion. If you refine cinnabar, you can come out with pure mercury. You know what happens to you if you handle mercury? You die. It's a reason why people would quit using it, right? Am I wrong for that? Is it beyond the realm of speculation that maybe they figured out, hey, this paint is killing us. And maybe we should use a different color red. Do you think maybe that was something? I think it was. And if chemistry is so little able to rival even the early medieval ages in some arts, why boast of achievements which, according to strong probability, were perfectly known thousands of years ago? The more archaeology and philology advance, the more humiliating to our pride are the discoveries which are daily made. The more glorious testimonials do they bear in behalf of those who, perhaps on account of the distance of their remote antiquity, have been until now considered ignorant flounderers in the deepest mire of superstition. Among other arts and sciences, the ancients, as a heirloom from the Atlanteans, had those of astronomy and symbolism, which included the knowledge of the zodiac. There is no reason whatsoever to believe that astronomy or symbolism came from Atlantis. There's not. As already explained, the whole of antiquity believed, with good reason, that humanity and its races were all intimately connected with the planets, and these with zodiacal signs. I'm about to start a whole study on the zodiac and astrology, so if you're interested, hang around. The whole world's history is recorded in the latter. In the ancient temples of Egypt, this was proved by the Dendera zodiac. But, except in an Arabic work, the property of a Sufi, the writer has never met with a correct copy of these marvelous records of the past, as also of the future, history of our globe. Yet, the original records exist, most undeniably. As Europeans are unacquainted with the real zodiacs of India, nor do they understand those they happen to know, witness Bentley, the reader is advised, in order to verify the statement, to turn to the works of Denon, Travels in Egypt, in which, if understood, the two famous Egyptian zodiacs can be found and examined. Having seen them personally, the writer has no longer need, to trust to what other students, who have examined and studied both very carefully, have to say of them. As asserted by the Egyptian priests to Herodotus, who was informed that the terrestrial pole and the pole of the ecliptic had formerly coincided, thus was it found and corroborated by Mackey. And once again, I will point out that this is a 12,000-year disaster cycle proof. Footnote. The mythological astronomy of the ancients demonstrated by a strangely intuitional symbologist and astronomer, a kind of self-made adept of Norwich, who lived in the first quarter of this century. For he states that the poles are represented in the zodiacs in both positions, and in that which shows the poles, polar axes, at right angles, there are marks which prove that it was not the last time they were in that position, but the first, after the zodiacs had been traced. Capricorn, he adds, is represented at the North Pole, and Cancer is divided near its middle, at the South Pole, which is a confirmation that originally they had their winter when the sun was in Cancer, but the chief characteristics of it being a monument commemorating the first time that the pole had been in that position are the Lion and the Virgin. See Part 2 of Mystery in the Zodiac. And again, the 12,000-year disaster cycle has at least an explanation for that. Broadly calculated, it is believed by the Egyptologists that the Great Pyramid was built 3,350 BC, and that Menes and his dynasty existed 750 years before. This is a wrong number, by the way. That is absolute is a big word, right? The Egyptologists, the people who are in charge of any study of the pyramids whatsoever, put out this number so that it can be attributed to their race. That does not mean it is correct. In fact, there is significant evidence to the contrary of that fact. Now, none of that evidence is allowed to be supported at all. It is not allowed to be peer-reviewed. It is not allowed to be disseminated. You have to go and search it and find it on your own, but it is out there. You can find it. There are very good reasons to believe that it is older than this, right? I don't know who built it. I don't know the means by which they built it because we cannot replicate it. But it is almost certainly older than this. And then Menes and his dynasty existed 750 years before the fourth dynasty, supposed to have built the pyramids, had appeared. Thus, 4,100 years BC is the age assigned to Menes. Now, Sir J. Gardner Wilkinson's declaration that all the facts lead to the conclusion that the Egyptians had already made very great progress in the arts of civilization before the age of Menes, and perhaps before they immigrated into the valley of the Nile, is very suggestive. As destroying this hypothesis, it points to great civilization in prehistoric times and a still greater antiquity. The Skesu Hor, the servants of Horus, were the people who had settled in Egypt, and, as M.G. Maspero affirms, it is to this prehistoric race that belongs the honor of having founded the principal cities of Egypt and establishes the most important sanctuaries. This was before the Great Pyramid epoch, and when Egypt had hardly arisen from the waters. Yet, they possessed the hieroglyphic form of writing special to the Egyptians, and must have been already considerably advanced in civilization. It is not just them, but several different civilizations that arise fully capable, right? There is no period of learning to do these things. Instead, there is a period of nobody's doing it and then everybody's doing it all at the same time. Now, whether that is somebody came down and taught everybody, or whether there was a cataclysm and all of a sudden everybody that were here moved to there and are now using technology that is under the water, is up for debate. It was, says Leonard Mont, the country of the great prehistoric sanctuaries, seats of the sacerdotal dominion, which played the most important part in the origin of civilization. What is the date assigned to this people? We hear of 4,000, at the utmost 5,000 years BC. Maspero. Now it is claimed that it is by means of the cycle of 25,868 years, the sidereal year, that the approximate year of the erection of the Great Pyramid can be ascertained. Assuming that the long, narrow downward passage was directed towards the pole star of the pyramid builders, astronomers have shown that Alpha Draconis, the then pole star, was in the required position about 3,350 BC, as well as in 2170 BC. But we are also told that this relative position of Alpha Draconis and Alcyone being an extraordinary one, it cannot occur again for a whole sidereal year. This demonstrates that, since the Dendera zodiac shows the passage of 3 sidereal years, the Great Pyramid must have been built 78,000 years ago. Or, in any case, that this possibility deserves to be accepted at least as readily as the latter date of 3,350 BC. Now, see, that is a whole problem, right? It is almost certain that the pyramids are older than this. 3,500, or 3,500, we'll just say 3,500. It is almost certain that they are older than that. There are significant reasons to believe it. There is no reason to believe, however, that it was 78,000 years ago. Even accounting for it being desert, the entire time, which, by the way, is almost certainly not the case. Erosion would have taken a much more drastic effect than it has. That is, again, just simply science. Right now, the casing stones were stripped. So maybe the casing stones bore the brunt of that. We can say that. But there would be significantly more problems over that vast span of time. It is entirely possible that it was close to 6,000 years. It is entirely possible that it was close to 12,000 years. But I would not place it any farther than that for a variety of reasons. Simply because it becomes impossible the farther back you push it. Now, again, I believe that there was a technologically advanced civilization. That does not mean that they had automobiles or the diesel engine. Right? It just meant that they had better technology than we attribute them with. That could be in antiquity, back 12,000 years, no problem. But once we start pushing back farther than that, it gets a little bit harder to stand on that. So, again, that is all speculative. All right. Also, you're assuming that the passage was directed towards the pole star. Why? There is no reason to expect that. There is no reason to say that that is why. It is possible, sure, but as far as I am aware, there is no records of the building of the pyramid, so you do not know what their intentions were with their placement. They are in at least a loose correlation with Orion, if the planet were in a different configuration. And by configuration, I mean tilt. Alright, so now we are down here. Now, on the zodiac of a certain temple in far northern India, as on the Dendera zodiac, the same characteristics of the sign are found. Those who know well the Hindu symbols and constellations will be able to find out by the description of the Egyptian whether the indications of the chronological time are correct or not. On the Dendera zodiac as preserved by the modern Egyptian Coptic and Greek adepts, and explained a little differently by Mackey, the lion stands upon the hydra and his tail is almost straight, pointing downwards at an angle of 40 or 50 degrees. This position agreeing with the original conformation of these constellations. But in many places we see the lion, Simha, Mackey adds, with his tail turned up over his back and ending with a serpent's head, thereby showing that the lion had been inverted, which indeed must have been the case with the whole zodiac and every other constellation, when the pole had been inverted. 12,000-year disaster cycle. Speaking of the circular zodiac, given also by Denon, he says, there, the lion is standing on the serpent, and his tail forming a curve downward, from which it is found that through 600,000 or 700,000 years must have passed between the two positions. Yet they had made but little difference between the constellations of Leo and the Hydra, while Virgo is represented very differently in the two. In the circular zodiac, the Virgin is nursing her child, but it seems that they had not had that idea when the pole was first within the plane of the ecliptic. For in this zodiac, as given by Denon, we see 3 virgins between the lines and the scales, the last of which holds in her hand a ear of wheat. It is as much to be lamented that there is in this zodiac a breach of the figure in the latter part of Leo and the beginning of Virgo, which has taken away 1 decan out of each sign. Nevertheless, the meaning is plain, as the 3 zodiacs belong to 3 different epochs, namely to the last 3 family races of the 4th subrace of the 5th root race, each of which must have lived approximately from 25 to 30,000 years. The first of these, the Aryan Asiatics, witnessed the doom of the last of the populations of the giant Atlanteans. Footnote. The term Atlantean must not mislead the reader to regard these as one race only, or even a nation. It is though one said Asiatics. Many, multi-typed and various were the Atlanteans, who represented several humanities. and almost a countless number of races and nations. That is not true. More varied indeed than would be the Europeans, were this name to be given indiscriminately to the 5 existing parts of the world, which, at the rate colonization is proceeding, will be the case, perhaps in less than 200 or 300 years. There were brown, red, yellow, white, and black Atlanteans, giants and dwarfs, as some African tribes comparatively are even now. And again, there is no reason to believe that. And fall back to Timaeus where we talked about it, but there were 10 kingdoms, so you can put a number on it, right? And even if you assume, which is an assumption, that each of those 10 kingdoms had different melanin levels, it still gives us a number, right? Not countless at all, from the only record we have of the place. Right? Anybody can count to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You've got 10 fingers, so you can do it. And again, there is no reason to believe in giant Atlanteans, who perished some 850,000 years ago, the Ruta and Daiitia island continents, towards the close of the Miocene age. Footnote 2. Says a teacher in Esoteric Buddhism on page 64. In the Eocene age, even in its very first part, the great cycle of the 4th race men, the Lemuro-Atlanteans, had already reached its highest point of civilization, and the great continent, the father of nearly all the present continents, showed the first symptoms of sinking. Sank in a single day. A single day. And on page 70 it is shown that Atlantis as a whole perished during the Miocene period. To show how the continents, races, nations, and cycles overlap each other, one has but to think of Lemuria, the last of whose lands perished about 700,000 years before the beginning of the Tertiary period, see page 65 of the same work, and the last of Atlantis only 11,000 years ago, thus both overlapping. One, the Atlantean period, and the other, the Aryan. Only if you just pull random numbers out of your ass, right? We do not have evidence of Lemuria even today. We have reasons to believe that it may have existed. That is true. We do not have proof that it did exist. We do not have any proof of anything 700,000 years ago. Now, this 11,000 years, which is closer to 12 now, that we do have a reference point for. We have a testimony of this cycle happening. That is in Timaeus. All right. The 4th subrace witnessed the destruction of the last remnant of the Atlanteans, the Aryo-Atlanteans, in the last island of Atlantis, namely some 11,000 years ago. In order to understand this, the reader is asked to glance at the diagram of the genealogical tree of the 5th root race, generally, though hardly correctly, called the Aryan race, and the explanations appended to it. Let the reader remember well that which is said of the divisions of the root races and the evolution of humanity in this work, and stated clearly and concisely in Mr. Sennett's Esoteric Buddhism. 1. There are 7 rounds in every Manvantara. This one is the 4th, and we are in the 5th root race at present. 2. Each root race has 7 subraces. 3. Each subrace has in its turn 7 ramifications, which may be called branch or family races. 4. The little tribes, offshoots and offshoots of the last named are countless and depend on karmic action. Examine the genealogical tree, here too appended, and you will understand. The illustration is purely diagrammatic, and it is only intended to assist the reader in obtaining a slight grasp of the subject, amidst the confusion which exists between the terms which have been used at different times for the divisions of humanity. It is also here attempted to express in figures, but only within approximate limits, for the sake of comparison, the duration of time through which it is possible to definitely distinguish one division from another. It would only lead to hopeless confusion if any attempt were made to give accurate dates to a few. For the races, subraces, etc., down to their smallest ramifications, overlap and are entangled with each other until it is nearly impossible to separate them. The human race has been compared to a tree, and this serves admirably as an illustration. That proves absolutely fucking nothing. The main stem of a tree may be compared to root race A. Its larger limb, like, what are you doing here? Its larger limbs to the various subraces, 7 in number, B1, B2, and each of these limbs are 7 branches or family races, C. After this, the cactus plant is a better illustration, for its fleshy leaves are covered with sharp spines, each of which may be compared to a nation or a tribe of human beings. Now, our 5th root race has already been in existence as a race sui generis, as quite free from its parent stem, about 1 million years. Therefore, it must be inferred that each of the 4 preceding subraces has lived approximately 210,000 years. Thus, each family race has an average existence of about 30,000 years. Thus, the European family race has a good many thousand years to run, although the nations or the innumerable spines upon it vary with each succeeding season of 3,000 or 4,000 years. It is somewhat curious to mark the comparative approximation of duration between the lives of a family race and a sidereal year. The knowledge of the foregoing and the accurately correct division form part and parcel of the mysteries, where the sciences were taught to the disciples and where they were transmitted by one hierophant to another. Everyone is aware that the European astronomers assign, arbitrarily enough, the date of the invention of the Egyptian zodiac to the years 2000 or 2500 BC, Proctor, and insist that this invention coincides in its date with that of the erection of the Great Pyramid. This, to an occultist and Eastern astronomer, must appear quite absurd. The year of the Kali Yuga is said to have begun between the 17th and 18th of February on the year 3102 BC. Now, the Hindus claim that in the year 20,400 before Kali Yuga, the origin of their zodiac coincided with the spring equinox, there being at the time a conjunction of the sun and moon, and Bailey proved by a lengthy and careful computation of that date that, even if fictitious, the epoch from which they had started to establish the beginning of their Kali Yuga was very real. That epoch is the year 3102 before our era, he writes. The lunar eclipse arriving just a fortnight after the beginning of the Black Age, it took place in a point situated between the wheat era Virgo and the star, Theta, of the same constellation. One of their most esoteric cycles is based upon certain conjunctions and respective positions of Virgo and the Pleiades. Hence, as the Egyptians brought their zodiac from southern India and Lanka, footnote, Ceylon, the esoteric meaning was evidently identical. The 3 virgins, or Virgo in 3 different positions, meant, with both, the record of the first 3 divine or astronomical dynasties, who taught the 3rd root race, and, after having abandoned the Atlanteans to their doom, returned, or redescended rather, during the 3rd sub-race of the 5th, in order to reveal, to saved humanity, the mysteries of their birthplace, the sidereal heavens. The same symbolical record of the human races in the 3 dynasties, gods, manes, semi-divine astrals of the 3rd and 4th, and the heroes of the 5th race, which preceded the purely human kings, was found in the distribution of the tiers and passages of the Egyptian labyrinth. As the three inversions of the poles, of course, changed the face of the zodiac, a new one had to be constructed each time. In Maxey's Sphinxiad, the speculations of the bold author must have horrified the orthodox position of the population of Norwich, as he says, fantastically enough. I tried to look up the Sphinxiad and I could not find a reference for it, so if you can find a reference for it, please drop it in the box. But, after all, the greatest length of time recorded by these monuments, the labyrinth, the pyramids, and the zodiacs, does not exceed 5 millions of years, which is not so. Footnote. The forefathers of the Aryan Brahmas had their zodiacal calculations and zodiac from those borne by Krisyaki power, the sons of Yoga, the Egyptians, from the Atlanteans of Ruta. 5 millions of years, which falls short of the records given us both by the esoteric Chinese and Hindus, which latter nation has registered a knowledge of time for 7 or 8 millions of years. Footnote 2. The former, therefore, may have registered time for 7 or 8 millions of years, but the Egyptians could not, which I have seen upon a talisman of porcelain. The Egyptian priest had the zodiacs of the Atlantean Asura Maya, as the modern Hindus still have. As stated in Esoteric Buddhism, the Egyptians, as well as the Greeks and the Romans some thousands of years ago, were remnants of the Atlanto-Aryans, i.e. the former of the older or Ruta Atlanteans. Just because it is stated in a book which is a commentary upon another book does not mean it is true. Right? Esoteric Buddhism is a commentary upon the Rig Veda and its applications. That does not mean that it is true. It is speculative entirely. The last named, the descendants of the last race of the island, whose sudden disappearance was narrated to Solon by the Egyptian initiates. It was not narrated to Solon, it was narrated to his uncle. The human dynasty of the older Egyptians, beginning with Menes, had all the knowledge of the Atlanteans, though there was no more Atlantean blood in their veins. Nevertheless, they had preserved all their archaic records. All this has been shown long ago. Footnote 3. This question was amply challenged and as amply discussed and answered. See 5 Years of Theosophy. And it is just because the Egyptian zodiac is between 75,000 and 80,000 years old that the zodiac of the Greeks is far later. Volney has correctly pointed out in his Ruins of Empires that it is only 16,984 years old, or up to the present date, 17,082. Footnote 4. Volney says that as Aries was in its 15th degree, 1447 BC, it follows that the first degree of Libra could not have coincided with the vernal equinox more lately than 15,194 years BC, to which, if you add 1790 since Christ, when Volney wrote this, it appears that 16,984 years have elapsed since the Greek, or rather Hellenic, origin of the zodiac. And that is going to bring us to the end of additional fragments from a commentary on the verses of stanza 12. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a series of somewhat difficult topics. I understand I have some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It is not intentional, but it is not something I apologize for. I will stand on the things that I know to be true as truth. I will speculate about a more wide variety of things, but I will not say that they are true, right? I fully, wholeheartedly endorse the 12,000-year disaster cycle, but I still say it is speculation. Until the cycle happens again, we don't know. We have scientific reasons why that is a very likely possibility. but we have no records of the last time it happened outside of some mythologies. It is entirely possible that these numbers are correct, but it is much more likely that they are not. We have fossil records, we have evidence of many things. We do not have evidence of humanity a million years ago. We do not have evidence of anything having an ethereal body, of course. We don't have evidence at all that the way that she describes humanity coming to be was a thing. It's possible, but it is not likely. There are other explanations that are more likely. Hopefully, I'm pretty good about telling you which ones are more likely than the other without necessarily just shitting upon it, right? There are some things we can, right? If you were saying this, you were stupid. That is the truth, right? If you believe that melanin makes any difference in the intellectual capacity of a person, you're fucking stupid. You're just wrong. I was wrong at one point. I grew up in a racist house. I know exactly where you are if you believe that. But it doesn't mean you're right, any more than it meant I was right. There is no correlation at all between intellectual capacity and melanin levels. If you believe that that is true, you are wrong. That I will stand on. As for most of the rest of this, it's speculative. I won't stand on it, right? I believe that it happened. I will tell you that I believe it happened, but I will not say that it did happen. I will say I believe it happened. So, hopefully that's a little bit clear. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was stated. Put it in the box down below, and if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. If there is another work you would like to see me discuss or just read aloud, drop that into the box as well. And if you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider a membership or pick up a copy of my book. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pit State. Peace.